Baldur's Gate 4 is gonna be complete shit. It's gonna be a massive disaster. It's gonna be one of the worst games probably in the last 20 years easily. And if you do not know what's going on, I understand that there's confusion, but I have been following this. And if you haven't, you probably don't understand a couple of things that are happening. And the main one is the fact that Wizards of the Coast owns the Baldur's Gate IP. Wizards of the Coast is one of the most rancid, incompetent, stupid companies that's filled to the brim with woke activists, by the way, if you also did not know that. And they are now gonna make Baldur's Gate 4. Yes, obviously after the success of 3, someone has to milk Baldur's Gate 4, and Wizards of the Coast have done it themselves. And if you're wondering how good Wizards of the Coast is as a company, they're currently getting sued out of existence because they themselves have internal emails admitting that they have no idea what they're doing. And if you don't think that's bad enough, well, the last game they did died in less than 2 hours. I didn't cover it, but my god, I should have. That game died in less than 2 hours. They spent multiple millions on literally hiring every single streamer, even with a bit of relevance when that game came out. And my god, all of those people just sat there in the town AFK because no one wanted to play the game. A day passed, the contracts ran out, and not a single person was left playing that dumpster fire. And it actually got shut down after not even a month, I think. It was one of the biggest disasters in gaming, and it didn't even get a lot of attention because it was so sad and bad no one wanted to talk about it. I didn't even talk about it, and I just talk about the sad and bad things typically. Oh my lord. Wow. And yes, this same company is now going to make Baldur's Gate 4. They have already pissed off Baldur's Gate fans, by the way, by vocifying already existing Baldur's Gate lore and whatnot. If you don't know, there's a huge controversy currently surrounding the Magic the Gathering release of the Baldur's Gate secret lair or whatever set name there is for it, because they decided to give all of the epic story moments to women who did not do the epic story moments. I mean, but again, this company literally made Aragorn black in Lord of the Rings. I'm not kidding. It is a disaster. And now these people are gonna make Baldur's Gate 4. I'm not expecting anything, but that's even expecting too much. The more details we get about this, the more insane it's probably gonna get. This is gonna be one of the greatest shit shows in the past, I don't know, decade.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it finally happened. We finally got the news of the next Baldur's Gate installment, Baldur's Gate 4-ish, and it's coming in the way that none of us expected. It's a TV show, which, when you think about it, really, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast.
What? Wait, but there is also a game. And this was just rumor, it never got confirmed, but remember the director of Dragon Age the Veil God? Yeah, that trans individual, that person was supposed to be the head of Baldur's Gate 4 also. Again, just so you know how truly bad things are.
This kind of makes a lot of sense considering they were going to grab another developer and be able to top what Larian achieved with Baldur's Gate 3. This route is an interesting one because, you know, Baldur's Gate 3 being an RPG with like 17,000 endings, I would just love to know how they're going to make this work and make the gaming community that love that experience not complain about every single aspect like people just complain about the Amazon Fallout TV show. Very curious to see how they manage all of that. But yes, Baldur's Gate 3.
The Fallout TV show deserves all the hate it can because it completely destroys it. It's an abomination. And if they make a Baldur's Gate TV show, oh my god. It's probably gonna be worse than the Acolyte. It's probably gonna be 100 times worse than the Acolyte. Also, this is just jumping on a fad because Wizards of the Coast are desperate because they're leaking money. They're leaking a lot of money.
One of the greatest games of all time. Like, look at this. Open critic scores, 97% critics recommended the experience on Steam. You got very positive, 96% score. Like, it is one of the greatest games of all time for a reason. Just so much love, so much content, so much quality. Everything about this experience stands out. And we even had debates on this channel about this game setting a new standard. People argued it was an old standard. Regardless, though, this was a huge moment for the gaming industry, and we're seeing many developers like the CD Projekt Red team, they're working in The Witcher 4, they even acknowledge that like this game meant something and we have to look at it for inspiration. So it has had its impact on the video game industry, but it does seem like Hasbro has been really trying to figure out how do we milk this further. You know, Larian brought the Baldur's Gate franchise back alive,
That is true.
but we want to make more money from this. And look, Baldur's Gate 3 just a massive success, sold over 20 million copies to date. That was as of just about a month or two ago. So big success. And the thing is, though, people don't understand, Larian, they had to really earn their way to even work on this franchise. And it does sound like the deal that they cut out with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast to work on the franchise, they weren't making as much money as they probably should have. And when this, you know, ended up being a massive success, it seems like Hasbro benefited a lot more than, well, than what we know of. And it's just rather interesting that also right around the time.
That's actually hard to accept, honestly, to a certain degree, because Hasbro thought that Baldur's Gate is a dead franchise. They did not expect anything from it. They did not expect to make a game. They did not expect any success. So, the reality is, Wizards of the Coast probably just gave Larian the IP kind of willy-nilly, and that seems to be more or less actually corroborated by the fact that Wizards of the Coast did not overreach in, well, they were really annoying, and the reasons Baldur's Gate 4 is not happening is because this dude right here, Sven Winkel, the owner of Larian, does not want to deal with Hasbro because while they did not overreach in typical Hasbro fashion, they still absolutely made the process of, using their IP an absolute a shit show. Sven refuses to make Baldur's Gate 4 just because that would mean dealing with Wizards of the Coast. And this time they would actually demand things from him. Previously, it was like, whatever, you're giving us free money. But now they would be like, oh, no. We need to make it by our metrics. And that means woke AF.
Time that Baldur's Gate 3 was this massive success, there was also stories like this being published by Polygon. Almost nobody left of D&D team that helped get Baldur's Gate 3 off the ground, says Larian CEO Sven Vink. Wizards of the Coast provided both story and system support. And that's why it's very interesting, because when Sven Vink has talked about the video game industry, he's really gone after the greed. And this is a great example of this. Like, I'm sure he wasn't necessarily targeting this specific instance, but this is one instance in which it directly happened. You know, Baldur's Gate 3, massive success. You saw those scores, you saw the sales, and Hasbro still slashed tons and tons of jobs. And yes, it definitely has an effect on that Larian team if they want to work on this franchise further. And they didn't. And it's because everybody at Wizards of the Coast, there's nobody there that they previously partnered with. And I think it's great evidence that to them, like, hey, Hasbro is this corporate behemoth. They don't have a respect for what we achieved here.
Corporate behemoth? Dude, Hasbro is struggling on every level currently. They're getting sued by a pension fund for destroying the value of their own franchise, which is true. There's some really ridiculously spicy emails surrounding what Hasbro actually does. They have mismanaged pretty much every product they ever had, which is insane. Which is absolutely insane. They are pretty much the first collectible card game to ever exist, and that's pretty much the only thing that has actually got them money. That's the only reason they have existed so long.
It's really best that we concentrate on what we're known for, which is Divinity, our own properties. And look, they were put in a new limelight. They were at the top of the video game industry. No matter what they did, it didn't make sense to work on somebody else's franchise, especially when the terms were more favorable to Hasbro. So it makes sense that they concentrated on Divinity, and obviously just about a month or two ago, we had that massive reveal and tons of reactions and excitement, at least with the announcement of, a new Divinity game. They're going to take all those lessons from Baldur's Gate 3 and bring it to their own franchise, maybe make it the next big thing in the video game industry. Maybe Divinity breaks out in a way that nobody ever expected. But yes, this is something that Sven Vink, he has really gone after the greed of this video game industry. We've talked extensively about this on the channel. Baldur's Gate 3 director criticized publishers' greed and layoffs. Greed has been effing this whole thing up for so long. The timing of this is very interesting. March 2024, this was just about 3 or 4 months after this big thing happened, which Hasbro laid off tons and tons of developers. Just the timing is rather notable. And I do know that Sven Vink has debunked some of this stuff, saying like, no, the reasons why we're not working with Wizards of the Coast isn't because of this stuff. But it definitely seems like it has played a factor, and the fact of they understand that this is a corporate behemoth and they cannot trust them, and also the fact that
a corporate behemoth that sells effectively toys that put a woman CEO in charge whose previous experience was selling cigarettes. I know. The stuff that we cover on this channel, if you say I'm making this stuff up, I mean, go ahead. I'm not. That's the funniest part about my channel. We cover such stupid things that you think we're making it up. But no, Wizards of the Coast, previous CEO Cynthia Williams, an experience only selling Marlboro cigarettes. Needless to say, she really tanked the brand. I mean, the damage that she did was... Kathleen Kennedy did more damage to Star Wars, but still, Cynthia Williams is in second spot, probably. Because she destroyed something that had more than 40 years of existence.
Individuals that helped them at Wizards of the Coast make Baldur's Gate 3 what it was, they're no longer there. But yes, Larian, they are working on Divinity, and they have said it's their biggest game ever that will be even larger than Baldur's Gate 3, which is, that is a bold statement to make. And Larian, this is what they announced in 2024. Again, this was just months after those layoffs. Larian Studios won't make Baldur's Gate 3 DLC expansions or Baldur's Gate 4. The developer is moving away from D&D. And yes, Sven Vink, the CEO, said the panel, Larian plans to move away from Dungeons and Dragons entirely and do something new, which we now know is Divinity, leaving the IP and publisher Wizards of the Coast's hands. And it previously was mentioned by Larian Studios senior product manager that they had discussions on doing more for Baldur's Gate 3, although at the time they were just focused on patches then. And obviously they came to the conclusion that they wanted to move on. Now, with that said though, we obviously knew that Baldur's Gate 3 was never going to stay dead. I mean, this is a franchise that now 20 million copies, they were going to move, they were going to do something. And this is something that Hasbro said right around the same time Sven Vink announced that they were moving on. Hasbro wants to make another Baldur's Gate sequel, but it's early days yet. We certainly hope that it's not another 25 years. And these were specific remarks that came in an interview with PC Gamer that Eugene Evans, Senior Vice President of Digital Strategy and Licensing for Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, about where the series goes from here. And this is what he said in his statement to them. We're now talking to lots of partners and being approached by a lot of partners who are embracing the challenge of what does the future of Baldur's Gate franchise look like, says Evans. So we certainly hope that it's not another 25 years as it was from Baldur's Gate 2 to 3 before we answer that. But we're going to take our time and find the right partner.
Again, this is all lies because Wizards of the Coast thought that Baldur's Gate is effectively just a dead franchise, that there's no point in making games for this because no one cares.
Right approach and the right product that could represent the future of Baldur's Gate. We take that very seriously, as we do with all of our decisions around our portfolio. We don't rush into decisions as to who to partner with on products or who products we should be considering. And it goes on to mention that I think it's too early to express specifics, and I think that there's a much bigger question about how we approach Baldur's Gate in the future, says Evans. But I would like to think about all of those characters, Baldur's Gate 3 characters for the sake of fans, could potentially appear in future products. And then, yeah, he says they are essentially part of D&D canon now. And Now it is the question of how are they going to treat these characters in a fucking TV show? Because that was the big announcement from Deadline. Craig Mazin, the co-creator of arguably the most acclaimed... The Last of Us TV show, I have problems with it. The first season was fine. Season 2 was an absolute disaster in so many
Season 1 was also ass.
different regards. Like, The Last of Us video game was already controversial in of itself, but the changes that were made within that TV series honestly ruins like a lot of the themes and stuff that, like, you can have your issues with Druckmann and the direction that they took with The Last of Us Part 2. Some of it made sense. A lot of it made sense, but the way that they did the TV show, it just totally...
Am I gonna be a dad? Am I a dad now? Oh my god. I call her retarded. People call me evil. Some random dude on the set says, oh, aren't you a little bit retarded? He's a hero. God, the world is unfair.
Undercut so much of what that game represented. It honestly was blasphemous, a lot of the decisions that they made. Like, he has a good reputation with some of his stuff. Like, Chernobyl was pretty good. But The Last of Us TV show, like...
Oh, Chernobyl, the TV show was actually really good.
Most acclaimed TV show adaptation doesn't do much for me, and I would actually argue even Fallout's better than that. Yeah, he's going to be taking on the hugely popular and acclaimed game title next. Larian Studios' Baldur's Gate 3, which is set in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. Unlike HBO's Last of Us, which retold the story from the PlayStation games, the Baldur's Gate TV series will be a continuation of the games, telling a story that takes place immediately after the events of Baldur's Gate 3, as the characters old and new are dealing with the ramifications of the events in the third game. So this is a...
Oh god, that already sounds like a Vogue thing. Oh, we did a thing that's objectively good? Well, actually, it's not really good because everything's just black and white. You know, the Mind Flayers, they're not actually evil if you think about it. Oh god, all the Mind Flayer sympathizers are gonna have such a great time with this. Oh no.
Direct sequel. This is literally Baldur's Gate 4. They're not going in the direction of a new video game from a, whatever studio. They're going the direction of a TV show adaptation. That is definitely a bold choice and one that makes me extremely nervous, and I do not trust that HBO and Hasbro are going to do this justice. And within the Deadline article, we do have a quote from Mazin talking about his love of Baldur's Gate 3. He says, after putting nearly 1,000 hours into the incredible world of Baldur's Gate 3, it is a dream come true to be able to continue the story that Larian and Wizards of the Coast created. I am a devoted fan of D&D and the brilliant way that Sven Vink and his gifted team adapted it. I can't wait to help bring Baldur's Gate and all of its incredible characters to life with as much respect and love as we can. I'm deeply grateful to Gabe Morano and his team at Hasbro for entrusting me with this incredible, important property. And if you didn't know, the reason why he's already moving on to his next project is because it looks like The Last of Us is going to be wrapping up with Season 3, which is not what this...
Yeah, which is hilarious. Again, Last of Us Season 1, as was the Fallout TV show, was unexpectedly successful. And Season 2 was absolutely dog water. People did not watch it, the audience just was not there, but because of how successful Season 1 was, they already made a deal that they're going to make Season 2 and 3. So, Season 3 was paid for. Needless to say, Season 3 is not getting a Season 4 afterwards because it's just bad.
Was originally intended to go. If you didn't know, The Last of Us was supposed to go on for like 4 or 5. It definitely was a strong insinuation that they were going to go beyond the video games and maybe even have the video game that lines up with the Last of Us Part 3 whenever that comes about. Clearly things changed because of the ratings. If you didn't know, The Last of Us Season 2 did not go in the proper direction that I think HBO expected, and it looks like it's going to wrap up with Season 3, and Naughty Dog's even
based haters, what can I say?
And already moving away from that. And look, people can make their issues. They can blame Druckmann, Mazin for what happened with The Last of Us. I just think that the show is an absolute disaster come Season 2. Obviously, people have different opinions about it, but it doesn't really inspire confidence. And I'm not the only person that feels that way. Maybe not necessarily because of this history, but Larian themselves don't exactly sound too thrilled that HBO and Hasbro are making a TV series that's going to continue the games with characters that...
Oh yeah, of course they're not. They're not excited about that. Every single person who's not a completely retarded activist knows that all of the goodwill Baldur's Gate 3 has created, all of the fans that Baldur's Gate 3 because of Larian has gotten, they're gonna watch the show, they're gonna hate it. Something that Larian pretty much resurrected from the game, built from almost the ground up, honestly, is now gonna be destroyed by activists who grift off of what Larian has made before. That is pathetic, and that is just plain wrong, obviously. So everyone who knows anything about the situation is pretty upset about what's going on. And it's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. Again, the more details we get about this, the worse it's going to get. Again, dealing with the aftermath is already a woke concept in and of itself, because anything that concludes not created by a woke decision making is a bad outcome in itself, because it does not prioritize the right things, aka inclusivity, diversity, and all the the typical woke slop garbage. So, you know the Mind Flayers are gonna be the good guys now. Or, you know, morally gray and... They're just, listen, they're just refugees, okay? They just crossed the border and they wanted a better life for themselves. Oh my god, it's gonna be a disaster. Well, it's gonna be a funny disaster, because this is gonna be generational comedy, honestly. In any case, that was Legacy Killer HD, 10 out of 10, bye!